Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Clara CFO Group channel. Today we are going to talk about 5 ways to analyze your expenses in your business. So last week we talked about 5 ways to analyze your revenue and really look into what's going on the sales side. So now it's time to look into what's going on the expense side of things. So we can, get a little bit on both sides of the P&L. We're going to dive into 5 different ways to look at that. It's the end of the year. It's time for you to look at your financials now that you have a whole year's worth of data to look back on. So that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. Real quick, before we get into all the information I have for you guys today, if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, please make sure you're subscribed. I would love to have you here as a subscriber, and also make sure that you have the little notification bell clicked as well so that you will be notified whenever a new video comes out. We typically post 1 video per week. We might have a bonus video here and there, so just make sure you know when those videos are posted. So let's get into the 5 ways that I have for you today to look at your expenses. And remember, this is not an exhaustive list of every kind of way that you can look at your expenses, but this is some of the tools and the ways that we look at expenses with clients when we're going through their P&Ls, when we're looking at year-end reviews, even when we first get started with a client, we're digging into the expenses so that we can understand the business better. And these are some of the ways that we look at them as CFOs. And so I wanted to share this with you guys today. So the first way, and kind of the easiest way to look at your expenses, is to look at your expenses by account. And yes, I mean account like accounting account, as in what are the buckets and what buckets is that money going into, because it shows up on your P&L. Those are the accounts I'm talking about. So your profit and loss statement is going to be what you need to do this expense review. I'm going to show you real quick how to pull a P&L in QuickBooks Online, just in case you don't know how to, and we're going to dive into that real quick. I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth into QuickBooks Online and then come back to telling you guys about this information, just so you know how to find this information, because we've got a couple really great reports. And let's go ahead and get into this. You can do this in any kind of accounting system that you have. I'm just using QuickBooks Online because it's my favorite, but I'm going to show that to you right now. All right, so here we are in the sample company of QuickBooks Online, and we are going to first make sure you're in the correct view so that you can follow along. If yours does not look like this, go up to the gear icon, and in the bottom right-hand corner, it should say switch to accountant view. And if it says switch to accountant view, you can click that and then yours will look like mine. I'm not gonna switch back because I wanna be in accountant view. So go down to reports, and then you're gonna click profit and loss. If profit and loss doesn't show up on your favorites here, it's down here in the business overview. So you can click profit and loss. Regular old profit and loss here, not looking for anything fancy at this point in time. We're going to select the date of last year, and then we're going to just look at the total, and then we are cash basis, so we're going to change that, and we're going to run report. And this is what I mean when I say running expenses by account, is by looking at these line items here. I'm going to zoom it in a little bit more for you guys so you can see. When I'm talking about expenses by account, I literally mean how much did you spend in advertising, this line item? Go in here and look at it. How much did you spend on automobile? Go in here, look at it. How much did you spend on each one of these items? And get yourself familiar with these expenses. This is really, really helpful stuff. So go directly to the P&L. That's how you pull the P&L. Let's get back to a couple more ways to analyze our expenses. The next way we want to look at our expenses is by running a year-over-year comparison. So this is where we want to say, if we're looking at last year, then what were expenses like the year before that, and how did they change? So this is change over the years. And what this will help us understand is where we're seeing growth in our expenses, where we're seeing maybe a shift. Like I have a lot of clients that are starting to move from contractor models into employees. So we're seeing a shift from contractor expenses into payroll expense. That's kind of a business model shift in some ways of like how we're operating the business. So that's really insightful on how much were we spending on contractors before, and how much are we spending on payroll, and what does that look like? Or maybe you have had some initiatives as you are trying to grow your business, maybe a big marketing push, and you want to compare how much did we spend on marketing last year versus revenue, and how much did we spend on marketing this year versus revenue? Things like that can be really insightful. So I'm going to show you how to pull that comparison P&L in QuickBooks. Again, you should be able to pull this in any other kind of accounting system you have, but again, I like QuickBooks. So we're going to go back into QuickBooks and I'm going to show you how to pull that report. Okay, so we're over here in the report section of QuickBooks Online again, and we're going to pull the regular P&L again. So we're going to click on our profit and loss, and then we're going to go to going ahead and selecting last year again, because this is the period we're analyzing. And then we're going to make sure our accounting method is set up. And then you're going to go to compare to another period. You're going to click previous year. And I think it's helpful to also have the dollar change and the percent change on here. So go ahead and click that. And then you can run your report from here. Now, the downside of the sample company is that it doesn't give us any data for 2021. So we can't see what this is actually showing in any kind of meaningful way. But what you can see is that you'll have a column for 2022, a column for 2021. Depending on when you watch this video, you could be comparing 2024 and 2025. I don't know. Hopefully this video has legs for quite a long time. But I think that the important part here is that you look at the dollar amount change, or the percentage change that will be over here is also very helpful. So you might see maybe materials in a certain category are increasing by only $1,000, but it might be 1,000%, or it might be a really big percentage. Maybe it's 500%, where before you were only spending, $200 on something, but now you're spending $1,000. It might be good for you to understand, like, not just the dollar amount increase, because it might not trigger you as much as thinking like, oh, that might be something I need to look into, as much as the percentage change. So I like looking at this year over year comparison. And then you can also do things like, how much is your revenue growing year over year versus how much is your payroll growing year over year, and see if those percentages are in line. You don't want to see payroll growing at 1,000 or 100% and revenue's only growing at 50%. That could be a problem, that maybe your pricing or your labor to revenue model is not quite working right. Okay, so this is where you can get a little bit more insight about where your expenses are going and also which direction they're going. Are they going up or are they going down? And this year over year comparison is really helpful for that. The third way that I have for you guys to look at expenses is to review your budget versus actual. Now, I understand this might not be applicable for everybody because you might have never created a budget. And how are you going to run a budget versus actual report if you don't have a budget? Kind of hard to do. So I encourage you to set a budget for this next year. Make sure that you have something in place, even if it's kind of at a high level. Just try to make a plan for what your expenses could look like. I do have videos on setting a budget for yourself, and I call them profit plans sometimes too. But those reports can be compared against what you actually did. So that is very insightful as well, because you can think about, what was I thinking the business was going to look like a year ago, and then what actually happened? And you can start to ask yourself, why? Why was payroll up more by $100,000? Or why was advertising and marketing more like double what we had planned? These kind of questions can be really helpful. Or maybe, why did we see a huge spike in software? We thought we knew everything that we were going to use, but software expenses up by 200%. Why? So by doing a budget versus actual, this can help you identify, if you were planning properly, and then if you weren't, or maybe you're a little bit more ad hoc, you like to make spur of the moment decisions, you might want to plan that into your next budget and build in a little bit more room for ad hoc spending, or maybe ad hoc travel, or if there's some other things that you want to have more flexibility in your spending. Think about that when you create your budget the next year. But this is a really good way to look at your expenses line by line. QuickBooks has an ability to do that if you have the level of QuickBooks, I believe it's at Plus, that you can put in your budget, and then you can run a budget versus actual. We use Jirav with our clients, so that's a financial planning and analysis tool. That's where all of our budgeting goes in, and we run budget to actuals in that system. So if you have a system that you can run it directly out of that, that's great, but you might need to do this in Excel, or you might need to do it just kind of on a high level in order to see, like, maybe we budgeted a certain amount of revenue, budgeted a certain amount of expenses, and then you can see where it all fell out from there. And if you just don't have a budget plan this for the next year. It's super helpful, really great to have a budget, and kind of critical for thinking about your business and starting to control those finances. The next report that I have for you, and this is the fourth way to analyze your expenses, is to look at the size of the expense. So we want to be paying the most attention to the things that are the most material, and that is a kind of a accounting term for like the things that matter the most. If it matters, it's material. What we want to do is look at and spend our focus on what are those larger percentages of expenses and make sure we spend our time analyzing those first. Doesn't mean that we don't look at everything on the P&L and, everything might be on the table for being chopped if it's an unnecessary expense, but I just don't want, and I've seen this happen before, people spending tons of time trying to save money, let's say on their phone bill or something, to get $5 cut off or $10 cut off every single month. That's great, but you might have, the elephant in the room is that you might be wasting a lot of time in payroll and you're paying for a bunch of hours that are inefficient. So it makes more sense, if payroll is your biggest expense, to focus on trying to streamline payroll and make sure that your processes are nice and smooth and that you aren't paying people for work they don't need to be doing. So just think about what's more material and focus your time on that. So I'm going to show you guys a report here in QuickBooks really quick that will make this process a lot easier for you. So if you want to make this easy on yourself, you can go into the search bar and just put percentage up here, and you'll find the profit and loss as a percentage of total income. You'll also find it in the business overview column, but let's just run it here. And so let's take the date to last year. Again, we're going to run it on cash basis. And so this is where we have a column showing all of the amounts that are on the P&L. This should match exactly. And then it's going to take each of those amounts and make it a percentage of income. So if, let's say if in this case, advertising was $74.86, total income was $5,080 or $5,080, that would be 100%. And then advertising, they're saying, is 1.47%. So this is where you can look through this and you can start to highlight your biggest expenses. So I'm seeing job materials is really big. Legal and professional fees, also pretty big. In comparison, this is quite a small P&L. There's not a lot of expenses in here, but this can show you where you need to start focusing, because I don't really want tons of time spent on the 0.36% when I have something that I could potentially, for 15% or, 7% almost here, look into maybe ways to save money or streamline some processes or things like that could create more efficiency. All right, and now we get into our last way to look at our expenses, and this one is expenses by vendor. Expenses by vendor. This can be really helpful if you're trying to identify, who you're doing the most business with. And especially if you're buying a lot of supplies and goods, or like if you have inventory, this is really great for you to identify who are you spending money with and who you might want to try to get volume discounts with, who you want to make sure that you keep a great relationship with, who do you think that you might be able to, maybe extend your terms a little bit more. So maybe if you're already on account with somebody and you have net 30, maybe you can negotiate net 45 or something that might help you with cash flow. These are just a really good way to think about, where is the money going? Who is it going to? Can you maintain those relationships? Are they good? Do you need to find replacement vendors? If you're kind of worried about, a potential vendor going under, now would be a good time to think, okay, if I'm spending $50,000 with this vendor every single year and that business goes under, do I have a replacement vendor for that? Always good to be thinking about that kind of thing. This is just a really great way to be able to dissect and look at this information in a different way. Now, this is another report that you can pull in QuickBooks. I'm sure you can pull it in other systems as well. The problem is sometimes I see people not doing detailed enough bookkeeping to get the right report coming out. If you've been watching any of my QuickBooks videos, you've seen that I really like to make sure that the vendor field is filled out. So when you're putting in a transaction, that the vendor name is there. That is important because of reports like this that I'm about to show you. So let's just hop into QuickBooks right now. Going back to reports, we're going to actually just type in here, vendor, expenses by vendor summary. And then again, we're going to go to last year. And so you'll see here, this is the name of different vendors that this business paid money to during the year. So in a perfect world, there is no uncategorized expenses. So they have everything has a name assigned. That would be super great. Have I seen this actually happen? Not very often, but this is really driven off of if you have good information coming in, you can have good information coming out. So now I have this really great report where I can say, okay, so my insurance is actually like one of the biggest expenses that I have. And, maybe that's a great place to go and shop around and say, is there any way for me to get slightly lower insurance? Great place to try to get some savings there. Or, lumber and building materials at Norton Lumber and Building Materials. Only $103 spent there. Are they more expensive than maybe going to a different lumber place? Or maybe they are someplace that we had a great experience with and we want to try to buy more from them this coming year. So these are just the kind of things that we can think about, okay, when we're looking at expenses by vendor. But this is just fact gathering information right now. Soak it all in. We're not really trying to find any answers to anything. It's just about really bringing all this information in, soaking it in, and we can make better business decisions when we have good data and we have good information. So this is what this video is really trying to help you guys just really get good data about all of your expenses. All right, so make sure you check out our revenue video. And then we also are gonna have, I'll put the budget video up here as well. So if you don't have a budget, you can grab it. But make sure you also stay tuned because we're gonna do more videos to help you on analyzing your financials when we're talking about a year-end review. All right, thanks so much, you guys, bye.